But I did also want to mention that another way of interacting is if you want to tweet, please tweet to hashtag LIDC seminars. So that's hashtag LIDC seminars to tweet. And now I'll hand back to Gun to introduce the speakers.
Sure. Thank you, Penny. Thank you for that. And again, thank you for everyone who's joined to talk about this this topic. I know being the class of 2020 is probably not as easy as you would have hoped, and I think perhaps some of you will have a stronger quarter-life crisis than many others had in the years before you. I'm a graduate of the year 2009, where I graduated with a degree in journalism. And it was also quite daunting at the moment in the middle of the financial crisis to find a job. Actually, the month I graduated, the local newspaper had on its front page a headline saying that it's absolutely impossible for recent journalism graduates to get a job at the moment, which was quite sad for us who had invested so much in our studies and we were ready to start working, and then that was just seemed to be impossible. And indeed, 6 months later, only 1 out of 25 people did have a job in journalism. But looking back a decade later, we have all sort of landed on our feet, we found our way. It wasn't necessarily the way we wanted or had envisioned, but all of us have proper jobs and are on a decent career path. Some people continued further studies. One became a doctor and another a dentist. One is in New York and works for the UN. And yeah, I think we've all sort of found our way, but it wasn't the way that we had thought initially. I know that the situation is a bit different for the class of 2020, because you can't, for instance, go to Australia on a work travel holiday while you sort of wait out the financial crisis. But there are still options, and that's why we're here today. We want to help you navigate what you can do, what's realistic, what you can do now in order to try to get a foot in the door in development. So that's also why we got these great speakers. So thank you to all of the speakers who have agreed to come and talk to us. The first one is Anu, who studied international journalism at City, and she graduated, I think, in 2010 or 11. And she has since then worked primarily in communications, but she's tried many different things, and she ended up working for the UN for quite some time. So I think I will hand over to Anu, so you can give your presentations.
Thank you so much, Goon. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and speak to all of you. As Goon said, it is a sort of tricky time if you've just graduated and you're looking for work, but it's also important to acknowledge that it's not impossible to find a job. There are options out there. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about sort of two perspectives. One is when I was starting out and when I was an applicant, also close to the time, as Goon mentioned, I graduated in 2010. So it was a difficult time to find work. So I'm going to talk about some of the methods that I used. And I'm also going to talk about, well, years later, when I was hiring interns and when I was hiring graduates to join the UN, what I thought about or what I considered then, and what you can do to set yourself apart as an applicant. And so what I'd like to talk to you about first is flexibility, right? Flexibility in terms of the type of role that you like to do. A career in international development, again, as Goon mentioned, it might not happen exactly the way you envision. So you have to be flexible and open to trying different things. So for instance, after I graduated, I worked with a media analysis firm. And was it my dream job? No, but it helped me gain a lot of skills that I could use eventually in my UN career. So it's okay to look at things and other jobs and avenues. It's worth looking at startups. It's worth looking at smaller organizations that give you a lot of responsibilities, especially as you graduated. And I think that really helped me out. The second thing to really think about is location, where you want to work. You might not immediately find work at a place that's a UN headquarter. You might find opportunities in other places. I went to the Middle East for a few months because I found a wonderful opportunity there. And again, was it the location that I had envisioned? Not really, but it was a wonderful job, and it taught me a lot of skills. I learned to interact with people from different cultures, and again, I could use that in my UN experience later. And what I also liked about is the other thing that worked for me is perseverance. When I got accepted to the UN, it was application number 37 for me. And I told myself when I started off that I would send out 100 applications before I let myself feel disappointed. It doesn't work. I felt disappointed with every rejection. But what it did is it gave me a broader goal. And the more you persevere, the more applications you send out, the chances are you'll find something. So really don't feel disheartened if things don't work out immediately. You will find something. You just have to hang in there, keep an eye out for opportunities, and keep consistently apply. You know, don't sort of feel like if something isn't working out, it's not. It will work out eventually. And the other thing that really works is just writing to people on LinkedIn. You know, if you find, I do that even today, right? If I find an organization that I think is interesting, where I think my skills could be used well, I just write to people, and it works. Sort of the worst case scenario is someone won't reply, and I think that's completely fine. But if you write to people more often than not, even if they don't have opportunities, one, they might reach out to give you some really good advice on where you can look, or connect you to people that are looking, or second, when they eventually have an opportunity for you, they'll remember you and they'll get in touch. So that's something I think is really useful. And I think I'm also going to talk about now what I considered when I was hiring new graduates to be part of my team at the UN. So the first thing that I look at is, in terms of an application, is someone who's really done their homework. It's important to look at an organization, look at their mission, their vision, values, the kind of information they're putting out on their social media channels, and incorporate that into your application, and even sort of tailor that into your CV. See what the organization finds important. And make sure that wherever relevant, that reflects in your CV as well. So it's very important to put a lot of time into researching an organization, having a strong cover letter and a strong CV. The other thing that you should really think about is what sets you apart from another applicant, right? So for me, it's anything, right? Even if someone's worked at, worked waiting tables at a restaurant, it shows me that they have initiative. Even though it may not directly apply to this job, it shows me that they've taken the initiative to go outside of what was expected of them. What might also be useful is setting up your own little website or web page and featuring projects and assignments. So anything you've done within university or outside of it, I find that's really useful. If you have a blog, make sure you highlight that. Also, be very aware of the sort of information you're putting out, and also be careful about that as well, right? Make sure it's thought through, make sure it's researched, and make sure it really reflects who you are. That's a good thing I find. And for me, when I'm looking to hire somebody, anybody with a bit of an edge, it makes a difference. And the other thing that might help is, with this website or web page that you set up, having an online portfolio, again, featuring as much work as possible, or anything that you think might interest a recruiter. And I think that's it, really. My biggest piece of advice, like I said, is just to be, persistent and to persevere, and not be afraid to write to people and get in touch with people. It's not difficult to find people's email addresses, and honestly, most people don't mind. And for me, I've had candidates reach out to me when I wasn't hiring, and yeah, they stood up to me later, and these were people we got in touch with, and it worked out. So I think those are the things that have really worked for me. Yeah, I think that's it. Over to you, Goon.
Thank you, Anu. That was really great. I think you offered some really good advice for the recent graduates we have here today, and the people who are still in university, especially this with sort of dealing with rejection and trying not to take that personally. Unfortunately, if it is the case, you'll probably have to send out many applications before you get get your first job. Anyway, next we have Dina, who's an associate professor at LSHTM. She has extensive experience with health systems in low and middle income countries. So yeah, over to you, Dina.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Do you hear me? Thank you. So I'm going to, so it's a great pleasure to be here. I really would like to share some of my insights, not just from my own experience, but from experience of hiring other people, composing research teams, having a lot of contacts on a daily basis. There are things that I have learned, and I want you also to avoid some mistakes that I've seen we do sometimes. First of all, I just have two areas that I would like to talk about. And the first thing is that I don't want to help you to find a job. I wanted to help find a career or niche where you'll be happy, and that will be something that you enjoy on a daily basis. My first point is there are a lot of jobs around, and as other people said, this you can find something, but the ultimate objective for you should be to find something that you really enjoy and love. So what are the steps? So the first thing is to just really think about yourself. What kind of job do you like? We very often have people who are analytical, sort of thinker type, who are into managerial jobs, organizational jobs, and that doesn't work. They're not happy, they're not satisfied. I think this is really important because both in international development, in academia, and in the intersection of those, there are different types of jobs. Some are more technical, some are more about synthesizing a huge amount of knowledge. Others are about quick decisions. So you really have to think and do your SWOT for yourself and think of what kind of things you do. The other thing I want to emphasize, when you do this process, you have to think about what do you want to do in life? Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? What kind of things do you want to do? I can say for myself, I grew up in Bulgaria, where we were unable to travel. We were very isolated from the world. So my lifelong ambition and mission was to be able to see the world and work with people over the world, but not just visit, not be a tourist. I love to really understand more about their societies and their social values. So that was something that was driving me in the long run. And it's something that I do in my job right now. I work in global health. But I also want to emphasize you need to really love what you do on a daily basis, because we have a lot of people who are going and doing stints in international organizations. And they're telling us that they found it very constrained, although it's called international organization, you're in charge of X and Y. But on a daily basis, you're just sitting there and you don't have access to any sort of opportunity to make analytical contribution. And some of those people have higher education degrees, that PhD, they're asked to do coordination role without having any opportunity to shape anything. They found this really difficult and they left. So you have to think about what is the job and the career, but on a daily basis, what are you likely to be asked to do? And again, I just want to just dismantle this idea that there are, of course, no jobs for life. And a lot of my colleagues move between academia and NGO and international organizations quite often, a few times during their career. So we have what's called portfolio careers, each of us. I also worked in NGO sector. I worked in Oxfam as a technical advisor for the Caucasus before I joined the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I did internships and in various organizations. One of those was in the World Bank. Again, I would like to say that there is no dichotomy. So, for example, if you're interested in the international development and you're interested in an analytical role, you could actually be working in the academia or in a think tank. For example, there is we work closely with Overseas Development Institute. They are think tank, they do huge variety of projects, and they work very closely with international actors, development organizations. So you could do your dream job and work in international development, be based in a think tank or at university. A lot of my projects are in close relationship with international organizations, funders, governments. At the moment, I'm working on corruption in Nigeria, and I'm collaborating with projects funded by Gates, with very operational projects. So I don't see myself, and a lot of my colleagues would say the same at the London School of Hygiene. We are very involved and immersed in these policy debates. We are not outside, although we are outside formally. We are really involved in terms of shaping policy advice and evaluating and really working together with people who are operationalizing this advice. Again, that's an ambition that we have, and increasingly when you work in sort of academic roles, so think tanks, you ask to have an impact. That's one of the metrics that I have to report about. So in a way, you could make a difference if that's something. As I said, my first point was what drives you. If you want to feel you're making a difference, you could still do it. You could bridge the gap between knowledge generation, implementation, and achieving results, observing these results. I have to say, when I was working in NGOs, in the NGO sector, one of the sort of challenges I found, although I loved the team, I enjoyed the work, and I really looked at the programs that I implemented, and seeing the results of your actions was very satisfying. However, I realized that I'm very interested in understanding how things can be better. Sometimes implementation could be very fast, and you don't have time to reflect, to think about how do you evaluate the impact of these programs. And some of these programs that we were doing, I was not fully convinced there is a clear impact or impact theory of change. So you have to see whether you're more doer or whether you're on the technical side, so management or fundraising, on communication. What are your skills? What do you enjoy doing all day long? So, and then I would like to say a few do's. I don't want to say don'ts, because I don't think we all make mistakes and we learn. Also, time change. When I started my career, I think my department was 30 people. At the moment, my department is 250 people. We have huge amount of projects and portfolios. So I was one of the early people who worked in this area. And that's maybe one of the key things that I would say. When you work in in a job, you do create your job. You have to find new niche, something new that it could be yours, that you could add. And there are always new avenues and new possibilities. But okay, how in practice? What are kind of some do's that I can recommend from what I observe and my own experience? So take opportunity to don't specialize too early. I think it's very important that we sort of get opportunities in different areas. So you could do pro bono work. I have a lot of people emailing me and saying, can I do some work on your projects? And some of those, last year, for example, we did a global assessment using an international database of health systems researchers trying to map where the gaps. And this was done by somebody from Harvard. She's a PhD student, but trying to get into jobs. So we did a paper. So she did that pro bono. So we do involve people all the time. So very often you may not receive a response if you write to people, but as Anu said, just keep going, because somebody will respond. And some of these people that came to work with us as volunteers, I'm still working with them, and they are now my colleagues. So what else can you do? So don't specialize too early. So the traditional model sometimes in the UK or various other high-income countries could be people do masters, then they do a PhD, and then they really stick to something. However, discipline or thematic area, and I would say don't do that, because things are changing. The topics and the areas I work now are really not what I was working 10 years ago. So I think it's really important to be a bit versatile and to think about to think of your skills as portfolio. Again, what are the generic skills that you can bring? Some of those could be methodological. For example, if you're good at qualitative or quantitative analysis, you could do that everywhere. You could do WHO commissions research, NGOs commissions research. We do research for them at university. So you could do these things. But you have to find what are your strengths and work on those, or build them. one thing that I want to emphasize, that very often the emphasis is on formal learning. However, I'm leading a projects which are on accelerating learning on health systems research. And this morning we had a seminar with 300 people in the West Pacific region. So really what we are observing is the shift from institution-based learning to independent learning. So you have to go and do online courses. You have to do everything. It's your responsibility to learn. You have to understand that you will learn every day of your life to the end of your career. And we do that. I think, like last night, I was taking an online course myself in a new area where I would like to expand my skills. My colleagues do the same. This is really important, and you have to keep learning and finding new niches and areas where you could be one of the best. So if you take a job that you don't enjoy, you constantly have to hunt for new topics, new opportunities. Again, every week, make sure you have 1 hour and have a coffee and just think what is interesting for you this week. What has happened? Are there any areas that you found particularly interesting? You have read something or you have attended a seminar, you want to learn a bit more, you think that's under research, or that's an area where you really want to go and work in international organizations. Take a note. You have to really write and reflect on your own thinking around this. Don't just jump from job to job, because as I said, you always have a job, but getting a life satisfaction out of a job is really what I think is very important. So finally, towards networks. So that's something that I don't always feel like I want to spend time on Twitter, but I know I have to, because that's how we network. That's how we disseminate. That's how we connect to people. The most interesting, I would say, in the past 6 months, papers or projects I've been involved is because people saw me on Twitter, or that's my main area, but I also do LinkedIn and various other. Sometimes it's a bit of a pressure because, as Anu said, you have to create your presence. You have to be very responsible about how you do it, what kind of face you're going to build out there, but you have to. You really have to. We don't have choice. That's how things work. Everything is about not just network. It's not just about tweeting, but building a relationship. So if you have seen a group that you want to become part of, just try to talk to them, try to say, how can you help? Or create your own group. That's something that I did in Health Systems Global. I was one of the co-founders. So this is now an organization with thousands of members. They do annual conferences. And I was one of the co-founders and initial board members and a thematic group member on training for health systems research. I decided to create this group together with 2 other friends. And it just, people followed us because there was a need for that at that time. So I think it's really important you to think about what is the group ideally that you want to create, that you can get 5 friends together and do it. It could be for women. I think it's also very important to create groups and network with people who are in a similar place to where you are, because you share the same experiences, so you could help each other. I think especially for women, I really recommend that you try to link to other women who are mentors, but also peers, and help each other. Again, be visible. We talked about that. I would say the last thing I would say, it doesn't matter what job you do. Absolutely not. But what matters is that you have to communicate. That's the reality of our life nowadays. So we have professionals who have left academia, they've left think tanks, but they're working in international organizations, and they're very active in publishing. They're very good at putting blogs out there, at doing panel sessions, Twitter chat. And why is this important? Because you may not want to stick forever in a particular job. A lot of organizations rotate people. And that's the reality. You could have a brilliant posting and then be sent somewhere where you struggle. It just doesn't work. The team doesn't work. You have to be able to show that you have transferable skills. You have to be out there. So when people Google, you don't have to lead everything. Absolutely not. As I said earlier, it's about you being part of teams. So if a team is working in a university or in international organizations, there are always informal groups, and you join those, and you are one of the co-authors on a paper. That's enough in a way. You really have to be out there and visible. So I'll stop here. Hopefully we can follow up some of those in the panel discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dina. That was really, really interesting, especially your reflection on this portfolio career, which I think is very much the case. So that was really interesting to hear. Also, the what you said about not specializing too early and sort of keeping your options open in a way. So that was really good. Next, we have Nikhil, who's joining us from Singapore. So Nikhil is a designer, and he has also done online volunteering for a number of UN agencies. He's also did an internship with UNOPS in Myanmar. So he's here to talk about his experience, particularly about online volunteering, which is something that you can do from home this summer during COVID. So over to you, Nikhil.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful.
Yes.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Gun, for that. And thank you to all the other panelists as well. It's great to join all of you from 10,000 kilometers away in Singapore. Honestly, it's a little daunting to be sitting here on a careers panel. I'm at the stage of my life where I'm more used to sitting on the other side of this, I guess in this case, virtual table, listening to others' recommendations and pointers. I've now returned to university and I'm in the middle of my master's program here in Singapore. So in the not too distant future, I'll be back where I think many of you are right now, freshly graduated and looking for a job. All this to say, I feel I'm far too early in my career to be giving advice to any of you about how to craft your futures. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do, let alone how and where I want to do it. That said, as Gun and I have chatted about, my last job search taught me a few ways to grapple with the experience of searching for a job that I think now rather unexpectedly are a little more widely relevant than I ever thought they might be. So today I'm going to share a little bit of that experience and that story in the hope that maybe some of it might resonate with some of you. Okay, some context. I studied architecture for undergrad, and though I loved the program and still love the discipline, I graduated in 2016 with mixed feelings about entering the profession. After receiving my degree, I stayed for another year in the US where I studied, working for 2 urban-focused nonprofits, doing work I really enjoyed at the nexus of architecture and social justice and other related issues. But my visa ran out and none of the organizations I worked for could afford to apply for a new one to keep me there. So I found myself on a plane back home to Singapore, where I grew up and where my parents still work and live, but with no legal right to live and work there myself, as I'm an Indian citizen, the one who has barely lived in India. For the next few months, I was in an awkward balancing act of trying to stay in the comfort of my home with my parents, with my familial support system, for as long as my tourist visa would allow, and then having to return to India where I legally belonged, but to a city I didn't know very well and felt rather out of place in. And through all of this, having to come to grips with what I wanted to do with my life and negotiating the crisis of confidence and ambition that so many of us, especially in this generation, I think, go through. Long story short, it was a stressful time, only compounded by the fact that, as both Anu and Dina have mentioned, job searches often feel endless when you're in them. You pour efforts into an app, and then you face silence for weeks or maybe even months as organizations process them. And that lack of a feedback loop, where you get the feeling of accomplishment of a finished task, can get to you. It certainly did to me. And at that time, I wasn't in a position to get a side job to keep me busy. In Singapore, I didn't have the work authorization, and in Chennai, I didn't know the language very well. And so most of my days were spent stuck in the same mental space, getting increasingly frustrated and stressed at this ever-present need to get a job. But despite all of that ambiguity, I was sure about a few things at the time. One, I knew that I did not know what my career was going to be. I had a vague idea of themes I wanted to be in touch with: design, cities, development, whatever that word might have meant to me at the time, and the relationship between people and places. And while such an unspecific direction worried me then, I now see how such broad parameters allowed me to get intrigued and excited by a wider range of opportunities that I might have otherwise barred myself from even considering. Two, I was particularly keen to work for an international organization. The idea of it felt attractive for some reason. I think it was because I wanted to experience a bigger organization after stints at two very small ones. And in fact, while preparing for this, I found an old message I sent to my parents from then, where I pontificated at length about how I wanted the feeling of being saddled with bureaucracy. I don't know why I chose to express it like that, but the sentiment stood. And third, I wanted to get to know a new place. New city, new country, just someplace new. I wanted to become acquainted with an unfamiliar world and way of being, and with new territories and their associated challenges. Now, I should note that all of these seem like very neatly packed realizations now, but I can say they were very scary, hard-fought, iterated learnings at the time. The very notion of declaring them felt outrageous. It made me so uncomfortable then, and I frequently questioned their grounding. Anyway, so all in all, while navigating immigration limbo, I was trying to consider and apply for a wide range of opportunities that I didn't really understand. I wasn't hearing back very often, and not being able to distract myself from that process very easily, I found myself going through cycles of pushing through on fumes and then burning out, each recursion eroding both confidence and motivation. Now, it was maybe 3 or 4 months after I left the US, a cousin of mine put me in touch with a friend of his who was working at a UN agency. And in that conversation, he laid out 3 paths that I ought to consider to enter a UN organization. As a consultant, for which I knew I was not nearly experienced enough. As an intern, for which I hadn't heard back for the few applications I'd submitted by then. And as a volunteer. Now, at that time, I couldn't qualify for the official UNV program, UN Volunteers program, because it's essentially a full-time job at an assigned duty station. And I hadn't reached the minimum qualifying age of 25 yet. But I saw that they had an online volunteering system that was open to anyone. Essentially, it's a website, onlinevolunteering.org, you can check it out, that allows UN agencies and affiliated organizations to list projects they need support for. It could be writing and editing, or research, or design, or a whole host of other tasks that allows people who want to help and have the skills to do so to be part of a larger initiative. I signed up mainly because it seemed like a good way to keep busy that I could engage with no matter where I was. All I needed was my internet, was an internet connection and my laptop. And it's a pretty similar process to applying for a job. You set up a profile on the website, and you find listings that seem interesting to you, and you apply for them. But the difference is that these projects are often very quick turnaround, so you often hear back a lot quicker, which is very nice to experience when you're in the middle of a longer-winded job search process. The first volunteering opportunity I got was to compile some basic demographic information about 40 or 50 cities to support the UN Habitat City Resilience Profiling Program. At the end of the day, it was fairly straightforward work, but in the process, I learned about the CRRP, its remit, and a little bit about how it works as a program. It felt really good to work on something as well, where I got to finish it and got feedback on it. In the following months, therefore, I did several other projects through the site, each one introducing me to new worlds of opportunities and challenges. I learned about an initiative to improve transparency in urban development projects in Latin America, a capacity building program for state-owned enterprises in Sri Lanka, an intergovernmental network for chemical and waste management in Latin America and the Caribbean, about the existence and scope of an organization called the International Think Tank for Landlocked Developing Countries, and about UNHCR's work and strategy in Mauritania. Now, each of my contributions to these larger efforts were undeniably small, but I felt like I'd received so much from these experiences. At the very least, I had learned about these organizations and what they do, and this helped me start to understand the constellation of actors who were working in different places. Some of the projects led to follow-up work, which was much appreciated, gratifying validation at that time, and also spurred me to contact other organizations not on the platform that I had been keen to work with. I'm convinced that it was that conviction that also led me to pursue a contact at an urbanism organization in Dhaka, and I got to write a little bit for them later on that year. Now, at first, it felt like the volunteering and my job apps were two parallel efforts, one to keep me busy and one to forge my future. But over time, I realized that perhaps they weren't so discrete after all. Now, I've never thought of myself as a graphic designer, though I have basic training as one. I've served as one a fair bit, and I enjoy the work. I studied architecture, I'm studying geography, and I identify with both of those disciplines much more. But I realized while doing graphic design projects as an online UN volunteer that my skills there might afford an entry to an organization where I might not have been able to get a foot in the door at that point in my career. So I started to reorient my job search to look for design vacancies that tick the 3 boxes from earlier, something related to cities or development-ish, an international organization, and a new place. My logic was get a taste of that world to learn if and how I might better place myself within it in the future. I only ever thought of it as an experiment. That's how I came across a listing for an internship in Yangon, Myanmar, with UNOPS, a UN agency that handles procurement, infrastructure, and fund management, among other things, and importantly is one of the few UN organizations that pays its interns. I applied, listing various UNV projects on my application, got through the interview and test, and somehow found my way to a job that I could never have imagined myself doing the year before. That 6-month internship as a graphic designer, which, as it happens, is when I met Gun, led to a contract job the following summer with one of the funds I had worked with, and now a retainer position with UNOPS that allows me to keep supporting the organization when their needs and my schedule align. It also introduced me to Myanmar, a country that was something of a vacuum on my map before, and is now the focus of my master's thesis. I don't want to make it seem like everything ties together with a neat bow. Life rarely does that, and I'm also not trying to advertise UNV specifically. I'm sure there are many organizations and platforms that do good work in this space. But I came to online volunteering during very specific personal circumstances where I was limited in my ability to work outside my house and where I needed to find a way to feel useful outside of applying to jobs. And I found it an unexpectedly reflexive and constructive exercise. I know that this is a function of privileges afforded to me that are not necessarily available to everyone, but I think the sentiment might still hold for many. On that note, one caveat I want to add is that there's a fine line between volunteering your services and potentially devaluing your skills. If you do decide to be an online volunteer, and I urge you to try if you're interested, I'd recommend you vet each project and organization before you apply. And it's important to be before you apply because these things tend to move quite quickly. In order to check whether you feel right to do that work for free. Sometimes the listing feels more like a proper job, and in those cases, I think it's perfectly fine to just scroll away. I have no formula to decide this, it's just a feeling. But I will say it's up to each of us to ensure that we don't devalue the skills we've acquired, nor the livelihoods that rely on those skills across the planet because of our early career decisions. Anyway, to end, I suspect that graduating in the midst of a global mandate for social distancing might create comparable, if albeit far more intense, constraints than the ones I experienced a few years ago, for which online volunteering might be able to provide structure, trigger reflection, and perhaps, maybe even start a career. Thanks.
Thank you, Nikhil. That was really, really great. I think a lot of people here can recognize the situation you have been in and found that very useful. At least I can see that in the chat. So thank you for sharing that. Next person on our list is Maria, who's a research associate. She studied at SOAS recently, and she's also worked for the UN, and she used to be an LIDC intern. So Maria is joining us from Indonesia. So please, yeah, the floor is yours, Maria. Thank you.
Can you guys see me and hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, well, that was really great, Nikhil. I was really I was just listening to you and I forgot it was my turn to speak. Anyway, yes, hi, my name is Maria and I'm joining you guys from Indonesia, which is not too far from Singapore. And I want to share about my experience in terms of looking for jobs or starting my career in international development. And I will echo a lot of the thing that Dina has said and also Nikhil has said. And also, I want to note that I understand your condition given the difficult circumstances that the world is facing right now. As I also just graduated last September 2019 from SOAS. So it is something that I still remember like 4 months ago, I was still unemployed. So it is something that I can really understand the hardships that you are right now having. So the first thing that I wanted to talk, it's about understanding that your university year is not going to change your life drastically. That after your like master's or PhD, if the thing is going to get any easier. In my experience is that I was always pushed to be curious, at least because I first landed a job in development sectors with my background as a communication student. It was like totally different world. And I was given a task to do a campaign on climate change in East Indonesia. And at the time it was like quite underdeveloped. And when I did that, instead of like focusing on my climate, like my communication work, I focused also on climate change work, and eventually it becomes something that an ongoing work that I do on gender, women, specifically in East Indonesia, and their access to financing. So that's the thing that I feel like having, you need to have a value to push beyond your job and where you work. Because I think like at the time I was working at the UN, but it's not really on the UN as an organization. It's really on the work that I'm actually doing, given that I am an Indonesian. So it meant a lot to me. And as a communication officer at the time, I was pushing myself to learn about climate change, and it ended up to like a continuous job. Like mentioning like what Nikhil said about UNV, I was recruited with the UN in a UNV position, and then I end up like continuing for 2 years before I finally take my master's in London. So if you have like, if you're curious and if you are persevere on your job, it's really not about where you work or whatever, but it's like if the people sees that value in you, you will continue, you can continue work at the thing that you really like. And like echoing again to Dina, is that this is a process instead of an end. So always be curious and keep learning. And the second thing is transferable knowledge. Again, like when you have a job, you have the tendency to be stuck on what you do on a basis, or maybe what your boss asks you to do. But having a job back again, like in my previous job, what I learned is that you can always be proactive and ask what you can do, or doing more than what you were asked to do. It is something that opens possibilities of more responsibilities. And like at the time I got like promoted to like another contract with the UN. So I was focused on the transferable knowledge. I was focused on, for example, polishing my English writing, for example, because I have my grad degree in Indonesia. So it is something that I also always need to polish. And a lot of people sees that in me, and that's why I continue on going. And the third thing is to learn outside of your discipline. The job market is really bad right now. I know that. I've been trying to find a work since last year. Even I was like 4 months in London, only doing a volunteer job and also internship at LIDC. It was a really hard time for me, and it continues when I went back to Indonesia, when finding a job that I think it will be easy is also not easy. So I was volunteering in a human rights job, which is something that I never think that I would do. And from that human rights job, it ended up to a consultancy job with an NGO based in London. And again, like I learned outside of my comfort zone. I was graduated from development studies, and then I segue to human rights job consultancy here in Indonesia. So what I learned from that experience is that your degree, it's really doesn't matter. What matters is your curiosity, and also how you are persevere and looking at the world of possibilities. And yeah, so that's what I learned, and learning on outside of your discipline. And the fourth thing is the way I end up getting my UN job, and as well as my current job as a research associate at Saraswati, is networking. So networking can also include an internship, and even my internship at LIDC, put me in this spot where I share with you, which I think it's a really difficult position, because like only a couple months ago I was like exactly where you guys are right now. But at the time, I kept networking. I kept on reaching out to people that I knew from my old job at the UN, and as well as the people that rejected my applications. So before I landed this job, I was on 4 or 5 final interview, which is like, it's after like I have first interview, and then you will have a writing test, and then you have final interview. That's how most development work has been recruiting. And after going through all that process and feeling like you're actually getting something that is closer to what you wanted, to at least get a job, I got rejected in that 4 applications. And the most important thing is that I kept on having their LinkedIn. I kept having their emails, and if there is something that I learned them, I always nudge them on LinkedIn, and like keeping my network with them. You know, so if you got rejected, it doesn't mean the window or the you know, it's closed, or it just means that it's not the right time for you. So always keep on your always contacting your network. And I also agree with like what Dina said. It's just like always be active within an issues that you're interested in. Like for example, right now I'm interested in how to decolonize development, and I'm active in the activism group in Indonesia about it, and I also active in the London group about it, to always have a conversation and to always keep things rolling, so you don't look like you are not doing anything, basically. So that is it for me. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much for that. I think you brought up some good points, especially about networking, and as some of the other speakers have talked about as well, to not give up and just keep going until you land something. We are now at our last speaker, which is Penny, who's a senior careers consultant at LSHTM. Over to you, Penny.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Just
yeah.
In amongst all those lovely comments to Maria. Yep, great. Thank you. So, in a way, my job is done, because what has gone before is so helpful, such really useful tips. And what I'm probably going to do is just re-emphasize a load of them. I'm not speaking from my own personal experience. I've been working at LSHTM as one of the careers consultants there for around 4 years. So during that time, I've been working with so many students in so many different situations, which is fantastic. But what I want to try and bring is a few tips that we talk with students about. And I've got a few key questions here, 3 key questions, but I wanted to start off by emphasizing that we are often working with people at all different stages and in all different situations. And I don't know who's in the room. I might recognize 1 or 2 names, but basically we are tending to think that there might be some people here who have no experience at all yet, just coming straight out of uni. There might be some people who've got some experience, but it's not within international development, it's something different. You might have some experience within international development, but you're trying to move on a bit. You might be from a lower middle income country hoping to work in your home country, or you might be from a high income country like the UK hoping to work in a lower middle income country. You might be from a lower middle income country, but hoping to work in a different place. So there are so many different ways that your situations might vary. But I think what has been said so far, and what I'm going to say, is all about general principles, and they really apply in all those situations. One thing I would say is, wherever you want to work and whatever you want to do, you need to be able to offer skills that will be useful. Now, that might seem really obvious, but it's particularly relevant if you want to go to a country that's not your own. Why would they employ you rather than someone from that country? And that's the same whether it's someone from the UK who wants to work in Malawi, just as an example, or someone from Malawi who wants to work in the UK, the US, or wherever else. There would be very obvious reasons why people would be wanting to recruit from the home country. It's a sound principle for building a sustainable workforce that's capable of long-term progress, not sort of flying in people. And somebody from that local country has the local understanding that will be beneficial in the work. So if you want to go anywhere except your home country, you are going to need to think about bringing skills that are in short supply, and you're also going to need to demonstrate that you've got the capability to work in that different setting. And then my second question, where's my evidence? It's no good just saying those things. You're going to need to have some evidence to back that up. That might be on the skills side of things. It might be stuff you've learned in your studies or in other jobs, whether or not they're in international development. It's been lovely to hear about people bringing different skills and the fact that it's not one skill set that is useful for this sector. Your evidence might be around how you've worked with diverse teams, you've got experience being sensitive to different cultures. If you're aiming to work in a challenging setting, you're likely to need evidence of experience living in such a setting. Now, that's quite a barrier in the world of international development, because quite often the only way you seem to be able to gain that experience is by volunteering. So one important step can be working out the most affordable and sustainable ways for you of doing that. And then another question, where are the jobs? I'm asked all the time where you find the jobs that are for people with little or no experience, because so much of what is advertised seems to require a certain number of years. Quite often, if you look at UN organisation, it might be 10 or more years of quite high level experience that's being asked for. And that's because that's what you're seeing are the jobs that are advertised internationally. And when you're starting off, the jobs you'd be trying to get are not necessarily even advertised at all. So that's already been mentioned about approaching organisations, getting in touch with people. There might be projects that they need doing, and you could be the right person to do them. Which brings me to my extra question of who do I know? And I put that on as my fourth question, but it's come up again and again, the importance of building those networks. When you try and approach organisations speculatively, it tends to work best if you've already built a relationship with that organisation, with somebody in it. You've made contacts, you've had conversations, you've really got a good understanding about the organisation, even before starting asking about work. So we are not paid by LinkedIn to promote them, but we're always talking about using LinkedIn to find people, as Anu said, and each of the speakers has spoken about those networks. It is incredibly important for this sector. The organisations you might try to work for are not going to spend lots and lots of money on their recruitment processes and on advertising jobs, except at the high level. So there's a very large informal job market, and you need to build your networks in order to access that. So who do you know? And I've just put here a little bit about what I would call it's job research more than job search. I felt so much for Nikhil about your situation where you hadn't got the visa to be working in places, and all you could therefore do was job applications. It's really demoralizing. And that's where turning it around into job research rather than job search can be quite helpful. Beginning to think more, as has also been said by other speakers, about what's right for you, what do you want, what kind of roles, what is it like working in that organisation, which organisations do you really want to be following on social media in order to be picking up opportunities and making that relationship. But it's also wider research about the settings. So if you've got particular countries you want to work in, it may or may not be the time for working in those. So I wanted to pick up again from other speakers about the need to be flexible. what kind of work is available is going to depend on many factors, but political and economic ones are perhaps most significant. International development requires a certain level of political and economic stability to be effective. So you need to think about where in the world that exists at that time, and where in the world which countries have which priorities, and how those might align with both your interests and your skills, so that you are looking in a place where the opportunities might exist. And that's going to, my second point there about following the money, that is where investment is going to happen. Where investment happens, that's where jobs can be. So on my final slide, I've just got a few pointers that I sometimes talk around with students. When you're thinking about a country that you might want to work in, it might be your home country. It might, and here I've put or country you have experience in or knowledge of, that you might want to share with others, but also it could be the country that you want to work in. So thinking about and finding out what are the key organizations there that you might want to be following and getting in touch with. Who's working there? What kind of work are they doing? What are the particular challenges, and what are the future challenges where work might come? And so on, round that circle, but never forgetting the what do you bring, and the fact that you will need to be able to offer something that's needed in that place and on that challenge. So you're going to need to be thinking about what skills you can present that are perhaps not readily available in that country if you are trying to go somewhere that's not your own. So that's quite a whistle-stop tour, because I don't feel that I've got what we've heard so far has been so good. I don't want to say the same things again. One thing I am going to do now, even before we go into questions, is I'm just going to paste into the chat box a feedback form that it would be great at whatever point you need to leave us if you could give us some feedback on this event. I hope that's okay, Gun. It's something we hadn't quite discussed before. And now I'll hand back for a time for questions. And as I said right at the beginning, but some people may not have joined by then, the way we'll questions is if you put them in the chat box, and then they will be posed to the panel. You can ask, you can address a question to a particular person or to the panel in general if you would like to do that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Penny. I think you sort of ended this with a lot of practical advice on what to do to get a job. Some of it I hadn't thought about, for instance, following the money, but that's definitely a very, very good advice. And yeah, of course, do fill in this feedback form if you have the chance. But anyway, so it's time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. But I already have a few questions, so I think I'll start with those for the panelists. If you just bear with me 1 second. So we have one question for Anu. And the question is, when you began your career as a journalist, did you know that you wanted to eventually make the transition into communications? Anu, can you hear us?
Yep. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I mean, to answer your question, this is going to sound kind of, I don't know, I always wanted to work for the UN. I knew that. It was a childhood dream, but I'd never, you know, I'd never really done anything concrete towards it when I was starting my career. But what I did find is communications uses a lot of the same skills journalism does, right? And for a good communicator, you need to be a good journalist, especially if you're doing that professionally, right? So checking your facts, knowing how to connect with people, and also as a communicator, knowing how to speak to journalists and how to pitch stories. Yeah, so I didn't know initially, but at some point it just felt like this natural switch because it used a lot of the same skills. And and it let me, I don't know, add value to an organization that I really aspire to be a part of. And yeah, I think that's what happened really. But when I started off, I don't think I thought about it consciously.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions in the chat. I think this first one is probably for Penny. What is your opinion on doing a master's in international development straight after an undergraduate degree? Should you work first, or is it fine if you know what you really want to do?
Hi, yes, and it may be that other people have something to add as well. So other panelists, do put your hands up and chip in. Oh, and I'm told my connection is poor right now, so I'll actually turn my video off and hope you can still hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I wouldn't say that there is a right or wrong answer about doing your master's straight after undergrad. The master's students I work with, I do think that those who haven't got experience already do find they've still got to make that that initial step after the masters, and it is quite tough doing that. So I think there can be real advantages on doing some work first, bearing in mind all those things we've said about flexibility, about being prepared to do things that weren't your ideal, but just using those as a way of gaining some experience that has some relevance and some use. Depending at what stage you are in undergrad, I would say this year is a bit different, and it may be that for this year, if you're just graduating, you might think, no, because of the way the job situation is right now, my master's comes next, and I can see some good reasons for that. Normally, I think there's great value in having some experience, and that can really help you be sure of what masters you want to do, where you want to do it, what you want to focus on in it. So it can give you a way of making the most of the masters as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Penny. Anyone else want to chip in on that, or no? Okay.
While I've got my microphone on still, I can see that there's a CV question coming next about how many pages are recommended for a CV or resume, both when applying for UN and for other jobs. So if I kick off the answer to that, I wonder if Anu might something.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to add on to your answer.
Recruiting for UN. As a general rule, for yeah, brilliant. As a general rule, we advise students to keep a CV to 2 pages, but with some sectors, probably not the ones you're most likely to go into, but things like investment banking, keep it to 1 page. But I'm speaking, that's quite a UK view on that. And I think sometimes in the US, people would go for a 1 page. But my big advice on CV, as has been mentioned earlier, is to be really targeted with it and not think that you're sending the same CV wherever you're applying and just altering your cover letter. Really focus on in your CV on the things that will appeal to that organisation that they've said they're looking for. Anu, would you like to say more?
So I just to add to that, most UN jobs have something called the P11 form. So it is instead of your CV, you have to fill out this big long application form. And so in those cases, you don't really need to think about it. But if you do need to send in a CV at this stage in your career, I would recommend a maximum of 2 pages. If you can fit it to 1 page, even better.
Thank you, Anu. We have another question. I think this one may be best for Dina, but anyone is welcome to answer it. Is it acceptable? Is it acceptable? No, sorry. Just keep switching. It's please, can you give some advice for career changers who have already had a successful career? Dina, you talked about this portfolio, so maybe you're best placed to answer this question.
Yes. So I'm talking from the perspective of some of the international organizations we work with, the type of people we see there, but also there are a lot of collaborations that are between international organizations and academia or think tank. For example, Gates. Gates have several spin-offs that are called, one is called Gates Ventures. So they are sort of connected to Gates, but they are joined with other actors. So there are a lot of things like that out there now. But generally, I would answer that I think it's not a problem, and in a way, sometimes it's an advantage. Uh, there is something in it that we have a lot of, for example, I'm thinking of concrete people, administrator, a sort of high level managing a whole research center and a program, multi-million program. She came from marketing, so she was a project manager in marketing. She doesn't know much about health, but she is extremely good at the management side of things, project management, and she has introduced tools which we don't use in academia, but they use in marketing for collaborative working, special systems that we invested in now. So it has been extremely helpful. And I would say sometimes there is almost like a bias because people want something different. People want something that could add value to us. We don't want necessarily people like we already have. We want somebody who is different. So again, it very much depends on the packaging. You have to package your skills in a really sort of way that show people why would you be the right person for them. We have had people from in our team, even as academics, who have had successful career in finance, a successful career as psychotherapists, as journalists. I'm talking to a journalist who is now making a transition to more academic type of communication, and we are thinking of even involving in methods development. So I see a lot of fluidity, but I'm just trying to think, why does it work for some people and not for others? Why is it so strict for some? I think it's to do with how you approach it as individuals. So when you approach somebody on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on email, don't just send them your CV and, hello, this is me, I want to work in your area. That's, we receive 300 emails a day. That's not going to work. But if you tell me, I saw, and that's how people have been successful with my team. Somebody approaches us and telling me, okay, I saw that you're doing X and Y projects. I have 1 month. I can do some work for you. I'm really searching to be part of a paper. And I'm just like, I have this and these skills. And I'm saying, fine. They really, sometimes the answer is no, but we have a lot of these because, and then what surprises me that because of our work together, I see the same person, we give them reference for a job, they're applying in the same institution. So that's another thing. But for example, in WHO, I see a lot of people who are coming from journalism, who are now in communications role. So even I saw some people who have taken DL courses, distance learning courses, and have gone into more programmatic work. So yeah, I see a lot of that. I'm quite sort of, I think it's not, it is possible, and it's how you actually do the contacts. How do you do it?
Penny, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I was just going to add to that around changing career. A key thing is working out how to present your skills from your previous career in a way that speaks to the sector you want to move into. So every sector has its own kind of terminology, its own jargon, and so it might be that the sector you want to move into, they talk a lot about monitoring and evaluation, M&E, whereas you've thought of it as quality control in another sector. So it's really worth working out what the skills are that you can show, but then converting them, if you like, into the language of the new sector.
That's definitely very good advice. Dina, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I forgot to mention something. I forgot to mention something really important, something that I've observed, I would say, in the last few months. Consultancies. Consultancies are desperate for people who have generic skills. So a lot of people who work on health financing, supporting governments in consultancy sector, they come from finance, they come from other disciplines, they don't come from health, for example. And I'm finding that consultancies are really easier to get into because they hire for particular projects. Very often people hire to do 3 months, they keep going and they then find another job. That would be the easiest way when you're switching. If you demonstrate your transferable skills in the right area, I feel there is a demand for people generally. It's always there. So if you have particular skill, that's not maybe more so much relevant for people who have just finished their masters. But if you have worked in something, you have areas, I think consultancy should be a really good entry point.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent advice. Thank you, Dina. We have a question from Maria. Maria, you mentioned you were involved in a group in London on decolonizing development. What is this group called and what was your role?
Hi, yes. Can you guys hear me? Okay. It's more like an informal group from me and some of my SOAS friends, and we want to start a conversation about how to decolonize development. Because most of us are now working in development ourselves, and also we try to incorporate like how we can within our job try to change, not try to change development, but it's more like how are we going to give a more positive and more local based influence in development work. So it's more like a mailing list of like us sharing some writings and also some readings. So, but if you want to join, like I can ask for your email and then we can talk after.
Okay, thank you. I have a question now from Nikhil. It's from a student who is currently volunteering online through a reputable organization, but the scope of work is far greater than what was described, and the ability of the volunteers to fulfill requirements of the roles is questionable. Is this something you've experienced, and what is your advice to people who find themselves in these kinds of volunteer positions to sort of protect themselves and the beneficiary communities?
Good question. Hard one too. I haven't experienced that before. I think the nature of the projects that I worked on through the online volunteering platform, they were specified they were very specific from the get-go. Can you Gun, can you describe the situation again?
So there's a person who is currently doing volunteer work, but that it was sold to her in the wrong way. The scope of the work is far greater. So basically, she signed up as a volunteer, and it seems like she's doing a normal job at this point. Do you have any advice for volunteers who might find themselves in this situation?
I mean, honestly, I think the first step for anything workplace related is talking to your supervisor in some capacity. If there is an issue with that and it's on paper that that there was a certain agreement, or at least a certain spirit of an agreement, you might find that it's just a misunderstanding, and your supervisor, I don't know, didn't get the same information, or you're on different pages about it, and so it might get resolved that way. Whether you're yeah, I'm a little out of my depth here, but Penny, please step in if you'd like to.
Yeah, Penny, what is your thought on this dilemma?
I'm not so sure you're out of your depth, because you did say some really helpful stuff about not undermining the skills of people whose work depends on being paid. But I think it may depend a little bit on what country this volunteering is in. So in the UK, the rules are a little bit woolly, but you're not really supposed to take people on unpaid if they're really doing a job that somebody else could be doing, if it's really actually a job. There is some flexibility for charities, whereas in other countries there aren't those regulations, so you wouldn't have that protection. But I think, as Nikhil says, if what you're doing is essentially a job, then and you're just being expected to work and do that voluntary, you have to question, is this worth it for you, or is it actually not worth it for you? But even if it is worth it for you, how long are you going to do that for? and set some kind of a time limit to it. And if you're feeling out of your depth, as I feel might have been in the original question, yes, definitely, there've got to be some questions, some conversations with your supervisor. And if you feel, well, this is really a job and actually I'm being exploited by just doing this voluntary, again, questions with your supervisor, and perhaps putting together a few pointers before you have that conversation about why this is a job, and what would be the prospect of perhaps turning it into a job and being employed to do it. It's a little bit difficult to say anything more specific, without addressing the particular individual situation.
Yeah, thank you both. I think that's probably very good advice, and it seems to be quite of a difficult situation to be in. We have another question.
Actually, I will say one other thing related to that. I think, therefore, also when you're looking to have an agreement with an organization to be a volunteer, try to ensure that the terms of what you're doing are specific. If everyone's on the same page as to what you're going to be working on, then that's great before you start as a volunteer. Obviously, once you're in it, it becomes more difficult to negotiate.
Yeah, this is very true. It's good to have it in writing, perhaps, and sort of your tasks lined out. That's great. Next question is for someone who is also quite experienced, it seems, with more than 10 years experience in project management, but no experience in international development. This person is asking what kind of sort of opportunities there are for people in project management. So I don't know who would like to answer that. Maybe Anu, perhaps?
Sure. I haven't worked a lot in project management myself, but I did work for about 7 years outside of the UN before I joined it. And I do know that very often they're looking for people with skills outside of the UN to do project management. As Penny mentioned, it's about presenting your skills and relating that to the industry and to the particular role that you're applying to. So there are lots of opportunities, and I know that organizations actively look for people who also work outside of the UN. It's just a matter of finding the right opportunity and presenting yourself well, I think. Yeah.
Penny, you wanted to add to that? Or?
Yes, I would just reinforce. It is perfectly possible to switch between sectors. You might need to take a step down, but the key thing is presenting those skills in a way that is what that new sector wants. And sometimes even quite experienced people will do an internship in order just to partly to get those relationships that we've kept on talking about. And I think that networking is a key thing in trying to find where you get that foot in the door of international development.
Thank you. Anu, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to add, for those of you who may not be aware, there are platforms that you can join. Like UN has a platform called Inspira, which doesn't show up when you Google it immediately, but you can go in there, create a profile, and there are different things you can look at, right? Look at being part of a roster. So whenever there's an opening, somebody will know your application is on there. When you're part of a roster, they know you, they know your profile. So basically just looking at platforms. There's Impact Pool as well. I think those are a couple of things you can use, not only while sort of switching industries, but also just looking for any opportunities that are out there that might be relevant to you.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that as well that project management skills, I would say, is very sought after, at least in the UN. As Penny mentioned, you may have to go down to a more junior level. But another tip would be to go somewhere that's not particularly, say, that glamorous. So maybe a field location or a hardship duty station where competition is a lot less fierce. I also think it's a bit what kind of project management experience you have. If it is in infrastructure, for instance, I think you have very good chances of securing a job. Okay, we have more questions. Let's see.
I wonder if we could just address Iris's question.
Sure, yeah.
Which is quite timely. seeing the UN international institutions are quite Western institutions, is there any development into involving local or indigenous knowledge systems currently? Because I do think that's a really good question. I mean, it goes with the decolonization as well. And I was kind of alluding to it a little bit, where I was saying, you know, in order to work in another country, like there is a move towards making things sustainable by using, yes, indigenous knowledge. UN organizations are quite slow to develop and change, but one of the areas where you know, where the way in is happening is at the country level jobs, country level and regional level jobs. You know, they will be the ones that are primarily hiring people from that country. But I think there is a little bit of a spotlight on these very high level organizations, and a concern that they are a little bit distant perhaps from the groups that they are working with. So I'd say that there's that yes, there is that move there, but it's probably slow progress. And I don't know if anyone would like to add something to that, because I do think it's an important question.
Yeah, Dina, maybe do you want to add anything?
Yes, I just wanted to say something very practical, but now Penny said something that I want to add to. This conversation was a lot about UN agencies, the big ones, and it's hard. It's hard to get. I know people who are trained with PhD and masters, they cannot get a job. But the same people, what they did via smaller organizations, so consultancy or NGO, at country level. For example, they take a job in Myanmar. Somebody was talking about Myanmar. One of my mentees was doctor. He had extremely high experience in a country, another country, and he's trained in the UK, but he couldn't get in. He couldn't get the job. I think at the right person at the right time. It's not about you. At that point in time, there was just a lot of demand, and then he applied for a few other positions in Myanmar, a few other places where he was able to get a job. You just have to not just look at the figures, you look at broader range of institutions. And for example, you have to follow the news and follow the money or the politics. We all heard how deep is merged with is merging with Foreign Office. So what's going to happen? What they've announced is that they are going to restructure departments. So there are a lot of people leaving and a lot of people being hired. So you should immediately think, can I go there and apply for some role? So these are the type of things you have to immediately look around. But don't forget that there are a lot of smaller consultancies, several people consultancies who are recruiting. And that's a really good point, because that's how you build your sort of portfolio of work. I just want to add some very practical things that I think, in my experience, people don't do and they should. So imagine you've been to an interview. This is not so much for the massive organizations, but like a middle-sized organization, small organization, or university, or think tank. You've been to an interview and you didn't get the job. The fact that you were at the interview, this means that you were shortlisted. You were one of the selected out of many. So you didn't get the job. Maybe there was one person who was better than you, better fit in terms of the criteria. So what has happened? We've hired people, and then this person 2 months later they left, or they found something better, or for personal reasons they couldn't take the job. So we ended up almost wanting to be in touch with the person who was the second on the list. This happened on two occasions, on one occasion, this person wrote a really nice email after the interview. Thank you, I really enjoyed the conversation with you, things like that. And we went back to this person. So don't forget that you could be, this job is not the best fit for you, but it could be something else that they can think about you. So you don't need to be over the top, but just send an email and maybe network with them.
That's very good advice. Definitely. Penny, did you want to add to that? Or?
Yes, I was just going to add to reinforce what Dina has said about smaller organisations. There's so much we could talk about in this session, and you know, we're short of time, but absolutely aim for smaller organisations, build experience that way. the UN organizations are definitely not everything, but addressing that question around them being rather Western, it's a slightly different question around, is that the right thing for them to be? But yeah, definitely small organizations are, and making speculative approaches, building those networks, that's a very good way to get started.
That's really great. Thank you so much. We have run out of time, so I think maybe we will end here. But I would like to say thank you for everyone who came, and not least thank you so much to all of the speakers. And we hope you found it useful and that it will help you in your upcoming job search. Do fill in this feedback form that Penny shared in the chat. We have recorded. Yes, perfect. Yes, we have recorded this, so I assume we will publish it on at least the LIDC website where you signed up for this event. You will find this under past events. We'll upload it there as soon as we're done editing it and cutting it. So yeah, I can send you all an email with the recording or the link to the recording once it's ready. And yeah, anything else, Penny? What have I missed?
I was just going to say thank you to the panelists who've been absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
It's been really a great selection of experience and such helpful advice.
Absolutely. So yeah, good luck to everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye.